It is the Lion Killer himself, Garry Tonon, who is back to work at One Fight Night 12. It streams live on Amazon Prime Video on Friday, July 14th in North American prime time. So it's getting very close, Garry. I guess give me the feel. I mean, I know you're all about competition, but mixed martial arts a little bit different. Give me the feel as you're ready to get back into action on this big card.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's interesting, what you're mentioning, the difference between jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. I've been competing in jiu-jitsu, and people ask me, they see my ears, just today, like when I was at the restaurant or whatever, they were like, oh, do you do, jiu-jitsu, whatever the case may be. And my answer is always like, oh yeah, I've been doing jiu-jitsu, been doing that for like 15 years, but mixed martial arts, like 4 or 5 years, you know what I mean? So it's like a much shorter period of time. And not only is it a much shorter period of time, like when you compete, you only compete a much longer period of time between each competition. In jiu-jitsu, when I was at the peak level competing in jiu-jitsu, when professional jiu-jitsu was becoming a thing, I mean, man, it was like probably once or twice a month, every month. And that's a lot of, in terms of, people talk about like ring rust and things like that. It's like when you're competing that often, like that almost just doesn't even exist. It's like you truly become like a professional competitor under that context. But, every sport's a little different. You don't just walk into mixed martial arts and because you competed well in jiu-jitsu, all of a sudden, like, the feelings are the same. It's, there's a lot more anxiety involved in mixed martial arts. There's a lot more things that can happen that are chaotic and that can go wrong, even if you're doing really, really well. And it took me a little while, some of it initially, there's some anxiety that developed because it was a new thing, right? Then I went through a grace period where it's like, hey, this is a new thing, but you're winning all the time. So it starts to feel pretty comfortable when you're beating everybody up and you're not really, you're not really having too many moments in your fights where, things are going wrong. And then finally, I finally fight at the absolute highest level in the sport and I'm fighting for a title and then I get knocked out, right? And now I've finally experienced like bitter defeat, right? So now my brain is aware of the true consequences of what's going on. Sure, I've had consequences in practice. Every once in a while I get hit a little bit hard or whatever the case may be. We're usually not trying to knock each other out in practice. Finally, it happens in live competition and it's like, oh man, like this is the reality of the situation. And not only is that moment the reality of the situation, you got to deal with everything that comes after it. Like, I go to visit my family and they don't know how to tactfully like bring these things up. Yeah, I visit my family afterwards. They're like, hey, yeah, we saw that last one, buddy. Like, are you okay? So, yeah, it's a tough thing, man. Mentally for not just that moment, but for mentally and physically, not just for that moment, but for a while afterwards. And then when you go to get back up on your horse and try to do it again, it's a challenge. I used to talk in interviews all the time. They'd ask me like how things are going in MMA. And it's like, great, while they're going great. Right. And then finally I experienced some frustration and my last fight went super well again, so hopefully I'd like to believe, I'm back in a much better headspace and, I am back up on the horse and I'm ready to go and I'm ready to go to war. And there's a certain level of confidence that comes with experience, like just, experiencing things over time and a certain level of confidence that comes with being naive. Right. And honestly, I prefer the confidence that comes with experience. Being naive is, it's okay. Like when you don't have a choice, typically when you're in that situation, because you haven't experienced, the thing yet. And I was there. But, I'd much rather be where I am. It's a much easier way to assess risks and everything because I know it's all laid out on the table. I know what's really, potentially able to happen. And it gives me that little bit more inspiration to, to work a little bit harder and keep skills very sharp because I know how dire the consequences really are, So anyway, I know it was a much shorter question than what you just asked. I'll actually answer the question. Going into this competition, I'm feeling very, very good. I'm feeling, like I'm going through all the details of what I need to do to prepare and to be confident, but I'm also prepared to experience the moment and understand that there's parts of this that are out of my control and just know I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that I win. And the rest is in, God's hands or whatever the case may be. And I'm just willing to trust that I'm doing the best that I can to make that happen. And there's a certain certain lighter feeling you get from doing that, you know?
I love it, man. You laid it out so well, man. And I guess that kind of got to the root of what I really wanted to talk about, because I was curious, like, you know, you're in a unique position because there's a lot of people that maybe have a grappling background and they kind of reach the limit of that and they say, well, I want to go do MMA just because it's the next challenge or it's the next financial opportunity or whatever it may be. You happen to be with one championship where you could continue to just grapple and get paid for that, right? And you could do well at that. And yet you decide, hey, I'm going to challenge myself with doing mixed martial arts. And then, you know, as you said, you laid it out perfectly, and I'm having all the success, so why don't I just keep doing it, right? And then you lose, and I could easily see you going, well, that was fun, but this is not really what I do. It was a nice adventure, but I'm going back to what I do. And yet here you are still chasing that. So I guess I'm curious what drives you to do that, because I got to imagine, Gary, I mean, given your credentials, given who you are, you could easily just go into the grappling division, which seems to be on fire right now with one championship, and say, I'm going to make my living there. And yet you're continuing down this MMA path. So what drives you to do that, giving the added challenges, giving the added difficulties it presents?
Yeah, it's entirely personal, you know. I think, and I don't mean that like I'm not going to answer the question. I just mean it's all from within, a pressure that comes from within me, you know. When I was younger, there was definitely times. Sorry, one of the dudes that trains here flies a helicopter. But there was a helicopter off right next to me, so my apologies. But you know, when I was younger, I think that there were a lot of driving factors. You know, you're kind of trying to find your place in the world, and you know, mentorship from various people can be, you know, maybe the driving force behind some of your actions, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. Maybe you don't realize it, but you know, there's other people driving the vehicle besides maybe just yourself. But as you become a little bit more self-actualized, well, hopefully anyway, you become a little bit more self-actualized as you get older, and you start to have to come up with reasons to do it for you. You know, it's hard to continue to rely on reasons to do things, you know, from other people. I think that I think it's a very unfulfilling way to live. And yeah, man, I think at this point, and with the level of consequences that there are for what I'm doing, it has to come from within. If I were doing this for anybody else, I think it would be reflected in my performance. I think it would be very difficult for me to be motivated to go do this. You know, if I was, you know, same thing if it was like some sort of outside influence, like money or something like that. I think there's just kind of like what you mentioned too with grappling. There are other things that I can do to make a good living. It's not like I need, sure, mixed martial arts for sure, you know, arguably makes more money. But, you know, in one recently anyway, with all the bonuses that they're giving away kind of willy-nilly, you know, arguably some of the guys that are grappling are actually probably making more money than I do per year doing their grappling matches if they give them a 50K bonus every single time they grapple, you know? So, but anyway, so that's clearly, you know, not the motivating factor. So it's just like a challenge for me, man. You know, it was the reason that I was addicted to jiu-jitsu in the first place. I have somewhat of an addictive personality. It used to kind of show itself a little bit like when I would play video games when I was a kid. You know, I really deeply loved like RPG style kind of things because it was a slow grind. It's like something where, if you're not familiar with a role-playing game, for anybody that might be listening, it's like, hey man, you're playing a character, and it's like, it's not just like an action game where it's like bang, 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 and it's over. It's like, man, there's a development process. You're probably going to lose a bunch of times. You're developing skills and attributes and all these sorts of things that will make you stronger over time, and then eventually, you know, be able to overcome these more difficult obstacles, right? And that was what was addicting about jiu-jitsu. You know, for me, it felt like there was always something new to work on, skill development and these sorts of things. And then, you know, in MMA, it's just even more. There's more skills and more things, and you know, I guess you could say, well, why not just fulfill that need in jiu-jitsu? It's like, well, it ups the ante a little bit in mixed martial arts. It's just a little bit more dangerous. Well, probably a lot more dangerous. It's a lot more dangerous. It's you know, there's a lot more risk involved. You know, arguably more rewarded in certain instances. At the very least, in terms of maybe notoriety. Maybe you could at least argue in that regard. You know, it's just a step above whatever I was doing before, and that feels better for me. I'm more motivated to do it. It's more exciting, and it's fun for me. I still enjoy grappling. I would still compete in grappling at some point. I'm not saying like no to any of those things, but this is my focus. I have a very, everybody in life, I guess, arguably has a pretty short window of time, but I had an even shorter window of time when I started doing mixed martial arts. It's like, 26 years old is pretty late to get in the game. There's not too many people getting in that late, at least anymore. Most people are starting much, much younger. And I had an opportunity. It's like, if I didn't start then when? When was I going to do it? And I think that I wanted to make the most of the time that I have on this earth. I accomplished a lot of things in grappling, and I wanted to see if I could, do just as well or better in mixed martial arts and just take on a new challenge. It's fun. It's a little bit like, getting to play another, character, or getting to play in another aspect of life. A lot of people basically just only get to commit themselves to one thing for life. If they want to seek some sort of high level, effect at that thing, they have to just focus on that. I was lucky enough to be involved with something where I could kind of parlay the skills from one thing into another. And now it's the same exciting experience I got at the beginning, while at the same time, that lengthy skill building process that I was talking to you about before.
I love it, man. I love it. For the purity of the game. All right, let's talk about the matchup you got here. Shamil, you're facing an undefeated athlete, an accomplished grappler in his own right. I guess, what do you think about the matchup that you've got here at One Fight Night 12?
Now, speaking about Shamil, there's not anything I can say, nor would I really want to, but there's not really anything I can say like to his detriment. I don't really want to. I'm not motivated to, but I also would have difficulty really saying too much negative about the guy. I mean, honestly, in this sport, anytime you get into double digits and you're undefeated, even if you want to argue that somebody's record is padded to some degree or whatever the case may be, I mean, it's still a very impressive thing just because of the chaos that exists in what we do. That's tough, man. Like, you have to be pretty damn good. You have to be doing a lot of things right to stay undefeated for long periods of time in a sport like mixed martial arts. I really believe that. So, there's something to be said for that. And it's my first undefeated opponent, if I'm not mistaken. I think I've had other opponents that were close, had like good records, but, very few losses. But I don't think this is the very first one. And, it's an exciting challenge for me, both because of the fact that this guy is undefeated, but also because of the fact that he comes from a style of mixed martial arts that is very popularized today. In mixed martial arts culture, we talk about these Dagestani Russian fighters, kind of look up to them in a light like, oh my God, these guys are doing something that like nobody else is able to do. And all of a sudden, a lot of these guys are rising to the top. You see, everybody saw Khabib do it, and now it's like everybody's just kind of waiting for, somebody else to kind of fill his shoes. And you see a lot of these other guys, Khamzat and other guys rising to the occasion and doing Islam, rising to the occasion and doing really, really well, right? And Shamil is definitely one of those guys. He hasn't had the opportunity to compete at the highest level as much as some of those other guys yet. But he did just compete against one of the guys that I thought was the best fighters in the division and won championship, and defeated him pretty handily. He took his back and strangled him. So he has competed at the highest level before, just not that much yet. And it's exciting to be able to match up against that style and just kind of show people like, what it would look like with a super high level grappler matching up against that style. Because honestly, I don't think we've seen too many examples of that in mixed martial arts yet, where we had one of these tough Dagestani wrestler types go up against somebody who's an exceptional submission artist. Ironically, speaking to Shamil's credit as well, he does things a little different than a lot of these other Dagestani guys. Like, Khabib could submit people, but his main thing was beating the crap out of people while they were on the ground. Shamil actually doesn't do that as much. He does hit people on the ground, but for the most part, he's interested in controlling and submitting people. So he's almost a little bit like a wrestling style jiu-jitsu guy in a way. He uses submission a lot more than he uses grapple box. If you ask me, in his fights, good for him. So that makes it a little bit interesting. He's a little unique in that way. But yeah, I'm excited about the matchup in multiple ways. I think it's going to be big for the grappling community in multiple ways.
I love it. That's a phenomenal breakdown. I look forward to when your competing days are done. That way you can just get into technical analysis, because that's a phenomenal breakdown of the matchup. So let me ask you, I mean, I am really excited about this matchup. I'm just curious where you go, right? Because, as you said, I mean, everything was going your way. You nearly reached the mountaintop. You had to face some adversity. Now you're on the way back from that. You've already taken the first step. This would be a huge step. Where do you see? I mean, is it hey, now we're calling out title shots. We want to get that. I mean, does that matter to you? It was so cool the way you described why you're doing what you're doing and just the challenge it presents. So do championships matter? Do titles matter? I mean, this would be a huge win. So with a victory, where do you go?
Right. I think titles matter, definitely, in the public eye. For me personally, the most important thing, I forget who this was. I want to say his name. I want to say his name's Mike. I can't remember his full name. He's a kickboxing guy on. I follow him on Instagram. I think maybe Samoan or like some sort of Pacific Islander. He does some really good technical breakdowns. But anyway, I remember listening to him in an interview and him saying that like the skulls collected were like the most important thing to him. And it's a fun, hyperbole way of saying like the tougher opponents that you beat, that's really the trophy, is the skull, like the win over the tougher opponent, right? Even in grappling, like I have a lot of titles, specifically in EBI. But I think when everybody talks about my grappling, like the number one match they always refer to is like me versus Paul Harris. I think a lot of people look at that match, despite the fact officially it's ruled as a draw, as me beating that guy. I didn't get an opportunity to submit him, unfortunately, but I think that's one of the matches that people talk about the most because it was the most impressive in people's eyes. This guy was like really, really big, a really dangerous submission artist, and I got to compete against him. And I'm sure people mention the EBI titles, and I'm sure that matters to people. It's like 5-6 times. I don't know. I think 5 times. But I'm sure that matters on some level. Certainly to promoters, they're going to announce that, and I guess I can use it, on my resume, per se, or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, I never hear more people talking about anything in regards to me than the tough people I've beaten or the exciting matches that I've had, right? That seems to be the most important thing to people rather than the specific titles that I win. I very rarely hear, anybody talk about the titles themselves. So I feel the same way about MMA to some degree. Obviously, there's other implications of winning a title, though. Like we said, there's some notoriety associated with it. There's some money associated with it and all these things. So on those, even if that's not the sole purpose of why I'm doing what I'm doing, I mean, let's be honest, everybody would love a bump in their paycheck. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm a virtuous monk fighter, that is only fighting for the love of the game. Like, God bless, like, this is a super tough thing and there's a lot of risks. Like, for sure, I want to get paid the most amount of money I possibly can to do it. So yeah, I think after this fight, especially if I win convincingly, calling out for another title shot isn't a terrible thing for me. But I've said this multiple times and I'll say it again. I still look at the most valuable win in the division being over Martin Nguyen, or Martin Nguyen, however people pronounce it. I'm not sure. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. I still look at that as the most valuable win in the division because he was the one who held the title and multiple titles for the longest period of time. I think he has cemented himself the most often in the most difficult fights, as the dominant guy. So even if he's not the title holder, I still look at that as the most important fight. But the good news is, because he's so goddamn good, if I call out for the title, chances are I'm fighting the guy at some point. You know what I mean? Like, he's not going anywhere. It doesn't seem like it, short of it, him getting hit by a bus, which, God, I hope that never happens. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think this guy's going anywhere. So, calling out for the title is not the worst thing. It's not me ducking him if I call out for it if he doesn't have it or anything like that. I know he's going to be the next one I'm fighting right after that, or 2 fights away or whatever. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, it seems like your passion is still there. I was so curious this journey you're on, if the passion for MMA would stay there after the setbacks, or it was just, let's ride this as long as we can. But it's so great to hear that you're still chasing that dream and being very effective at it. So, Garry, thanks, I appreciate the time. One Fight Night 12, again, Amazon Prime Video, Friday, July 14th in prime time in North America. It looks like a phenomenal matchup on paper. It's another great card, and we'll definitely watch. And Garry, thank you so much for the time.
Rock on. Thank you, guys. Hope you guys tune in.